you probably have noticed that there is absolutely no description of this workshop. And that was partly deliberate. That is, I didn't want to give or to create any expectations as to what is going on to happen. We shall focus on Macbeth, but not from the start. That is, the first question will go back to Macbeth, and then we will make a philosophical detour and then return to Macbeth. We'll proceed this way. I want you to start thinking about the play in terms of color. If you were to assign one single color to the play, don't tell anyone else what it is, but I can see people smiling, so I think everybody agrees on what it is. Do we have this color around? Somewhere. Somewhere. Don't say what color you thought of, but looking around, maybe there is a trace of it. Is there? Make a mental note of this color, and then we'll return to it, okay? And also try to think about justifying the choice of this color, because that will become significant at one point. This is all about Macbeth at the very moment. Oh, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Małgorzata Grzegorzewska, University of Warsaw. That's enough. We are going to start with, as I said, with philosophical background to what will help us then, perhaps, read deeper into some short passages from Macbeth, but passages which I find absolutely relevant for the reading of the entire play. And this has to do with our first activity. Once again, look around you and think about bodies. Bodies, and I deliberately stress this word. Bodies that fill the space around us. Okay? And make, again, mental notes of the bodies that you have noticed. You may now think about a little bit of physical exercise, because I encourage you to stand up, go around, and touch some of the bodies that you've noticed or that you've spotted. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going with the bodies. Body. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Oh, this is a terribly un-COVID-like exercise, I've just noticed. But, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Was there anything surprising, because I realize that you've been focused on touching the bodies that you've spotted, but maybe you noticed the behavior of other people. Now, has there been anything surprising about the way they thought about bodies in this room? Would you like to share your experience of that exercise with other people at the moment?
I was looking for something really devilish, and I found horns.
Okay.
I was trying to...
No, not you. No.
Okay.
I was trying to touch people, the response to the way they approached me. So actually, sometimes it was a shake, I was shaking their hands.
I've noticed that some people were touching others, and other people thought that it was almost necessary to make personal contact by a handshake rather than...
I actually got a very nice massage.
So that was another way of approaching it. Has anyone? I just recorded one action of one person here. Jacek, what did you touch?
Two-dimensional images, representations of bodies.
That's how you thought about it. That makes it even more complex, because if I were assigned this task, I would probably do something like this. Perhaps that. Does it make a difference?
Well, an object is not a body.
Could you please engage in a dialogue? Marta, I've heard about your workshop. Could you please engage in a dialogue on the nature of objects and bodies for a short while? Because you said an object is not a body. Maria challenges you on that point.
Because she finds everybody's body of knowledge.
Body of knowledge makes it even more challenging. But how about inert bodies? That is, the understanding of body as a physical object that doesn't.
Dead body, I wouldn't touch it.
But you do touch so many, but Jacek touched something that was, after all, an inanimate, physical, one-dimensional. I mean, although every paper has its third dimension, but has its thickness. But you touched something that is only a representation of a body, and after all, it is a physical object. Right? What is the main difference in touching this kind of body and what most of you did?
Because we went for human being.
Yes, you went for human beings, which in itself is fascinating. It shows that you are in the 5th day of the workshops. You're too much into human thinking and human dimensions and dialogue, etc., etc. It shows your perfect immersion in this spirit of dialogue with other humans, which we've been so traumatically deprived of in the time of COVID, when we interact only with, after all, representations of other beings being produced on the screen.
I'm curious, because this is a very special situation. If it were so that if we've just met, it might have been different. But we are after 5 days of very embodied interactions.
Encouraging.
Which were unusual.
In this context.
Exactly.
Each other and response.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I thought about touching objects, but I have an obstacle. All the people here first, if I had time, I would have done that as well.
So, yeah, exactly. But it was the environment that created the space for meeting other human beings rather than simply touching bodies, because the instruction was very explicit, wasn't it? Touch body. Think about bodies, touch bodies. As we all know, the English language has another word which comes close to body, but connotes something completely different.
Is it about flesh?
I'm thinking about flesh. I didn't ask you to think in terms of flesh or enfleshed experience. I asked you specifically about bodies, which in my conceptual thinking was rather three-dimensional objects of whatever kind, both animate and inanimate, that, I said, fill in this space, not people who came here, not enfleshed beings, not even living objects, but bodies. In a moment, I'll introduce another concept that is sensible bodies, and not sensible bodies in the sense of bodies that make sense, but sensible bodies meaning bodies that are made up, whose perception in our mental space is made up of the data provided by our senses, right? The sensible objects around us are those chairs, for instance, which have some weight, but try to feel the texture of the covering of the chairs. Think about the color, and here I encourage just one person. I need one volunteer.
There you go.
Come to me, come to me. Have a look at your own chair, that's a perfect specimen, and the one that is close to the camera. What color is it?
It depends on the light. This one is, it has a lighter part on the both side of the chair, while this has a very dark part on the side of the chair.
This one has got, as far as I can see, a triangle, right? Because of
light.
Because of the light and because of the hood that, or your coat that is behind it, and it gives this a shape of the triangle. And we are deceived into thinking that the seat of this chair is actually two-colored, isn't it? From our point of view, it has got two colors. It's light brown, you said grey.
Yeah.
I would say brownish red, brownish grey. To me, it has a touch of brown.
Does that really?
Yes. To me, it has a touch of brown. As I stand here, it has got something. I'm not, but it has something warm in the color.
Yes.
Grey to me is a very cold color. This has some touch of something warm.
Yeah.
I mean, if we had the third person standing here who is colorblind, the person would probably be totally surprised by our conversation about the difference between grey and brownish grey and the warm color, cold color. Thank you very much. I think we've done what we needed, because it means that we perceived, I mean, the moment we differed on colors, we perceived a completely different object. It had different color. Maybe if I stood at a different angle, I certainly would see a slightly different shape. Is this a real chair? Is this a real chair? Does this chair exist? I mean,
Depends.
yeah, it of course depends on the philosopher we are now going to ask whether this is a real chair. But the question here is the actual existence of real bodies, but not only that. That is the status of the so-called sensible bodies. And of course, we are going back to all this apparently childish thing is going back to the period that interests us, that is, when Shakespeare wrote his plays, people thought very intensely about the status of sensible reality. After all, we are standing on the threshold of what in the history of art is called Baroque, or the English hate this word because it brings all these associations with, the nasty counter-reformation thing. The dirty word starting with C in this case. But it is the period in art which constantly calls in doubt or challenges our perceptions. The whole idea of illusion in Baroque art, that which has elliptical shape, when you come closer to it, turns out to be, or that which appears to be a circle, when you come closer to it, and this dimension is shortened, turns out to be elliptical. I thought, well, the other way around. Or you look at the painting, which seems to be three-dimensional, but it is not. You look at on the other hand, you look at the painting, which seems to be one-dimensional, but it turns out to have a real kind of semi-sculpture attached to it. So it is, in fact, three-dimensional. All the time, you're challenged, you're bombarded with data which call in doubt your perception of the world and the status of sensible objects. My favorite poet, John Donne, when he described the way we understand the world or we perceive the world, says that we see the world through the lattices of our eyes and we listen to it or hear it through the labyrinths of our ears. What a perfect metaphor. One thinks about ears and one immediately thinks about the shape of the ear, but then one comes to think what it means. Lattices of eyes, labyrinths of ears. Think about it for a short while, and once again, try to fill those metaphors with some meaning as to how John Donne tries to represent the representation of the world that we are confronted with.
I'm very sorry, lattices, what does that mean?
Lattices is when it is like blinds in the window.
Yeah, thank you.
All right? So the window, I mean, we tend to think about eyes that are windows.
Yes, yeah.
But here we are confronted with something which prevents light from coming in, but also if it prevents light from coming in, it also makes it difficult to see objects behind it. Right? It is a perfect match to the labyrinth of ears. And he says one thing twice, but he says, with sight, it is the same as with hearing.
Maybe because we filter. Okay? This is the filter through which filter about perceptions, experiences, backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, but it's also construction, right?
Thank you very much. That is, the philosopher whom I will mention later on, French contemporary philosopher Jean-Luc Marion, says that there is a major difference between looking and seeing. And contrary to what, for instance, the Bible tells us that they looked but they didn't see, or they listened but they didn't hear, he says that actually, when we open our eyes, the moment we open our eyes, we're already engaged in what? Close your eyes, open them, and what happens? You first see before. That is because seeing is not selective. I mean, the visible. This is an actual quote from Jean-Luc Marion. He says, "The visible surrounds us like air. You cannot escape from it. You turn around, and there are other things that jump at you because you see them. In front of you, there are things visible. Above you, there is this visible ceiling, and below me, there is this visible floor. But the moment I focus on the person, I'm engaged in the selective, focused, intentional, and that's the key word here, intentional action of looking at. And that is my choice. I need to narrow down, as if to frame the picture, because otherwise, everything else is seen. So I said it is just the reversal of the biblical seeing as something deeper than looking at, because there, seeing is understanding, grasping. And here, seeing is merely the flow of perception that comes to us, and looking at is intentional. So, with going back to the lattices and labyrinths, it may be either the fact that our senses are only partly reliable and they only let in a portion of knowledge, or it may be that our mind processes it. And of course, in the labyrinth, the indispensable object is a thread. And this thread might be our intention. We get to, I mean, you know, it is with, for instance, our relatives of some age. My mother is perfect in hearing only what she wants to hear. I said, people at a certain age, I do the same very often. I mean, this is normal that we intentionally pick up certain things. Maybe we even deceive ourselves, and perhaps we even really don't hear what we don't want to hear. That's another psychological element in that. But the people that I'm going to talk about now were not actually interested in this. They were interested only in introducing to us different ways of perceiving the world, and precisely the difference in the status of two kinds of bodies, that is, sensible bodies and the so-called sentient bodies. If I am allowed to use a word that does not exist in English, feelable bodies. There are visible bodies, right? So there may be also feelable bodies and feeling bodies. Flesh, of course, belongs to the latter group. We do not see the world only with our body, but it is our flesh, our living matter, which interacts with the world. And this is why also some of you felt it so embarrassing to come to another person and touch it as an object, as an inert object, and you felt almost compelled to shake hands, because after all, this is not an inert body. After all, there is subjectivity in it. There is intentionality that comes to you. Counter-intentionality, that is, what you want to do is confronted with the will of another person. We all know this embarrassing moment when you stretch your hand and it hangs because there is no will on the other side, right? So we have this kind of, this conceptual framework, which I said is important for getting deeper into Shakespeare's plays. And another French philosopher, which I'm going to introduce now. Sorry, this is not on your handouts. The text is only to be seen on the screen. I'll read it very slowly, and then we'll see what it tells us. It's brief excerpts from a work by Michel Henry, a French philosopher who makes most of this distinction between body and flesh. This is already visible in the Greek way of thinking about the world. The Greeks had soma, all the somatic things are actually have to do with body, and sarx, which is like meat, flesh, in the English language. Michel Henry starts with something absolutely obvious. Our access to the body is limited to what it presents of itself, what it gives of itself. That is, we cannot, as if, move beyond the surface of the chair. It is there, and it gives itself as it gives itself. Full stop. It presents itself in the world. In short, it is a sensible body. We've already heard that cluster, sensible body. It's a body that is accessible to our senses. This is how that phrase translates. It's a sensible body, something that is seen, heard. Well, the chair can be heard. That I can touch. I asked you to touch bodies. Jacek partly touched paper, which is He said he touched representation, but he touched paper. Feel, what did the paper feel like?
Smooth.
Huh? And the chair feels what? What does the...
A bit rough.
A bit rough, yeah, depending on whether you touch the plastic part or the textile part. Cold, warm. The chair is warm if somebody has already used it, and it may be unpleasantly cold if it stood in this room for a long time and the windows were open. So again, it is either this or that. Firm or soft, which is rough or smooth, and finally, which is even one more category, which is beautiful or ugly. We have emotional attitude towards it. Some people respond positively to certain objects, and some people will respond negatively to exactly the same objects. As the things in the world generally tend to be. Everything around us can be assigned those qualities. But this description or interpretation of the body was shuttered at the beginning of the 17th century. So we are teleported into Shakespeare's times. We start thinking in terms of those people. The collapse of the traditional view of the body is at the origin of modernity, the culture to which we belong. That's why very often in literary criticism we talk about Renaissance. In English we use the term early modern. They are us, but slightly before us, but it is already the same same way of thinking. The culture to which we belong, but we stand on the threshold of the culture to which we belong. We are the children of a culture that differs from those that preceded it, in that it arose from an intellectual decision. And this intellectual decision, of which we are the descendants, whether we know it or not, whether we want it or not, was made by Galileo Galilei. And it has nothing to do with the fact whether the earth moves or not. There is a deeper thing at stake here. As Michel Henry reminds us, this decisive event occurred in the very beginning of the 17th century when Galileo declared that this body that we take for the real body, the sensible body, the chair that we spoke about, the colors of the chair, the softness, the warmth of the chair, tactile qualities, colors, something that can be touched, colors, odors. Oh, the chair can have its smell as well. I mean, when you bring in new furniture home, you smell the house. All those tactile qualities, it is only an illusion. And the real universe is not comprised of such sensible bodies. Real things are not what changes so rapidly depending on the perceiving subject. They are not real because for a real thing, it has to be the same all the time. And if it changes from one person to another, if we couldn't agree on the color on the chair, this cannot be a real chair, according to Galileo. That our access to this real universe can no longer be a sensible knowledge. Instead, he claimed that the real universe to which the body belongs is actually made up of extended material bodies that consequently present certain shapes and forms, only that. Perhaps some of you have heard this famous statement by Galileo Galilei that this wonderful book of nature is written in a special kind of language. Can you guess what language is that in which the world speaks to us? It is not the language of color. It is not the language of sensual perception. What is it? No, because emotions, again, differ from person to person, so it cannot be used as a reliable form of communication, because communication has to deliver to us reliable data, and if you get different input, you will not get reliable communication.
You mean concepts?
which in a sense can be brought together because certain abstract objects like mathematical notions are precisely, Galileo Galilei, some people say that Galileo Galilei did a horrible thing to the world. He killed the world because he translated existence into the language of mathematics, into pure abstraction. Everything is simply a matter of numbers and shapes. The same John Donne, whom I have already quoted, said, the world is spent. He writes that in the Anatomy of the World. The world is spent, and no man's wit can well direct us where to look for it. The element of fire is quite put out, the element of fire, that which gives life to the world, and all is just supply and relation. It is measurement, numbers, geometrical figures. This is what the book of nature, this is the language of the book of nature. And the proper knowledge for understanding these shapes is geometric knowledge, reminds us Michel Henry. So what follows is this underlined part of the text. So the sensible knowledge of sensible bodies, a knowledge that varies from one individual to another, a knowledge that varies from one individual to another and on which no universal scientific knowledge can be founded, must be replaced by this rational knowledge, concepts, by the rational knowledge that can be applied by any mind, namely geometry. And that is exactly, says Michel Henry, what Galileo did. And we think that the story is over, but a little bit more of this philosophical introduction now. Let's go on. He then says, it is necessary to substitute the series of naive appearances. They are naive because we are like children. We think we know, but we do not really know. It's necessary to substitute the series of naive appearances with the geometric knowledge of material bodies, the sole true knowledge, rational thinking. The universe, said Galileo Galilei, is a great book. This book is written in a particular language, the characters of which are circles, triangles, and other geometric shapes. Only those who understand this language can know and comprehend our particular universe. And we think that the story is over, but the picture is muddled by another French philosopher. That is, Galileo Galilei was not a French philosopher, but I am talking about one who was predecessor of Michel Henry and other names that will come up in the course of our today's meeting, namely René Descartes. Because Descartes thinks very deeply, and we tend to, what is your memory of Descartes? I mean, what is Descartes mostly associated with?
Dualism.
Dualism, body and soul, and cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am.
It took life from the animals.
But yes, and I'll come back to that, but before I do that, I pick on what Jacek said, I think therefore I am. Do you think it would be possible to assign to Galileo Galilei the statement, I walk, therefore I am? I breathe, therefore I am. I mean, thinking about this dualism, it seems very unlikely. I can see Maria is skeptical about it.
No, I'm not skeptical. I just think that he did this horrible thing of separating us from our bodies. And saying that we're only those thinking minds, and the body just doesn't matter. It's just this machine that doesn't.
Because you've said it,
Don't do it to me.
How do you know that? How do you know that you're walking and now walking in a circle? How do you know that? How do you...
Inside, from my increasingly disoriented.
I mean, from being dizzy. But okay, let's practice straight line. How do you know that you walk in a straight line?
Actually, a lot of it is concentrated here.
Thank you very much. Because when contemporary thinkers reread Descartes and his Meditations on the Soul, they actually noticed that he didn't use an axe separating body and soul, but rather thought about or opened the path, which was never actually pursued until the 20th century, not 21st, but 20th century, the fact that our walking, eating, drinking, kissing, whatever, is always conceptualized. That is, we always know what we are doing. And it is our knowing what we are doing that makes us real beings. That is, we exist because we know we are walking. We exist, we know, we think about walking. That is, not think intentionally, but we process mentally the idea, the activity of walking. Not the idea, but the activity of walking. One cannot be separated from another, and Descartes was far too sophisticated a mind to think otherwise, and he actually wrote it, but nobody grasped this essential moment. He says, come on, cogito ergo sum means I walk, therefore I am. That is, I'm aware of walking, I'm aware of eating, I am aware of pain, therefore I am. I intended to start this workshop with a slightly less pleasant activity that we started with. You know this English saying, pinch me, I think I'm dreaming. Why pinch me? Why pinch me or I am dreaming? I'm not going any further unless you process the proverb in your minds. Pinch me or I'm dreaming. And the processing needs to end with pronouncement. Pinch me or I'm dreaming. I'm not putting pressure.
So I need a physical stimulus to make me aware in my mind that I'm here. Yes?
Physical
Make me aware of my body, therefore of my existence.
Uses pain. I think the crucial, pinching can be mildly unpleasant. I mean, it is not hurting or harming, but it is slightly, yes.
I'm more conscious of the body, but only when you
pain or ecstasy. There are two extremes, and we are on the well-known extremes of the human body, that is love and death, or love and dying, right? That is erotic pleasure or intensive pain. I mean, we're never, Claudia, absolutely, yes, we're never more aware of our bodies. Pinch me, therefore I am, and therefore I am. But Descartes perfectly grasped this. It is only, and then one thinks, generations of philosophers did this to Descartes, and then students leave schools thinking only in the schematic terms along the line of res cogita, res extensa, and there is no connection between one and the other. No. In Descartes, there is connection. And this connection was picked up, this time, by a German philosopher. We are now arriving, so we went back to Galileo Galilei, then we made a short stop at Descartes, and of course the one who made most of Descartes' thought was the author of the so-called Cartesian Meditations, this time a German philosopher of Jewish origin, who was expelled from the university by his promising student, Martin Heidegger. And we're talking, of course, about Edmund Husserl, who is the founder of phenomenology and who precisely thinks about Cartesian philosophy along the lines of what he calls the living world. Husserl and his phenomenology brings us back to the living world. Michel-Henri sums it up in the following manner. So it is necessary to return to the sensible world. It is already present in Descartes, actually, but it is only heightened or it is only picked up by Husserl. It is necessary to return to the sensible world and consequently ponder the sensible body that we've taken at the starting point of our analysis of the body and which cannot be discarded so easily. This sensible world, which serves as the ground of the scientific world, is the one in which men and women live and that Husserl calls the life world, Lebenswelt. Husserl actually tells us that the world, notice that Husserl takes us back before the times of Galilei. I told you that Galileo Galilei as if performed the anatomy of the world, that is, we could rather say post-mortem of the world. It is this kind of Galilean thought. And now with Husserl, we return to the idea of the world that is site of life, and in which our feeling bodies play a crucial role in the construction of knowledge. Not only abstractions, but our feeling bodies, phenomena. And that's why we are into the world of phenomenology, right? And there is this moment when Michel-Henri shows that he was not only a philosopher, but also the author of novels, and that he has the grasp of the living world, when he says, this is the world where water is cool, where it is pleasant to go for a dip, look at the blue of the sky, or listen to the wind. If we imagine a world in which the sensible qualities have all vanished, a world of particles, wouldn't such a world be unlivable? In such a world, a kiss, emptied of all desire, emotion, and sensation, would be reduced to a bombardment of particles. A beautiful passage, isn't it? I mean, this is the moment when we understand that we living in the world of emotions are not just two bodies that touch each other in a bombardment of particles, but when we embrace, when we kiss, when we shake hand, we signal emotions. And shaking hands, that's why we return to our initial exercise. Notice that this illustrates the point about shaking hands. Because what you did there, you showed your emotions, exchanged emotions. It was coming forth with accepting the other, welcoming, being together with the other. Yes. But when I shake hands with Marta, I feel the temperature of her hand. I feel other qualities of her skin, and she feels mine. But when I do this, and each of us, each of you, is now encouraged to do that, what do you really feel?
It depends. You can feel your left hand and your right hand. You can feel your fingers, but they are just beginning to focus on your attention.
Okay, but
There's many meditation
yes.
practices like that. I recognize and the same.
Listen to that, because this is absolutely vital. We've just been told that in many meditations you focus. That is, you guide your attention to the fact that the so-called auto-affection is not just that your two hands do not melt into one, but there is your right hand and your left hand. But when you don't meditate, when you simply touch your hands or clasp your hands, as in this gesture, you realize, after all, yes, your left hand is different than your right hand, but still, it is your left hand and your right hand, and it will still make a difference between me feeling my left hand touching my right hand and me clasping hands with Martha.
I don't know how it is connected, but if I go well, there was some cognitive experiment, and if you put the hand on your table, and you will rotate one hand, and somebody else's hand will appear, it's not your hand, your brain is going to recognize the other one hand as your own.
But
I don't know
only as long as you look on them. I'm not an expert, but I think that if the alien hand appears here, and if you start practicing meditation, you will not come to the conclusion that your right hand is touching your left hand.
Maybe not.
I think we would have to, I'm not an expert, I think one would have to go deeper into neuroscience in that. I don't know. But that's an interesting point. I think feeling here would tell us how to understand that. And notice that we are now very much into the idea of not feelable, but the feeling body. That is flesh. Flesh which is also living flesh, because the very beginning that we had problems with when we had to come to terms with the fact that bodies are also chairs. There are bodies which are not made of flesh. There are bodies which are made of bricks. There are bodies which are made of wood. There are bodies which are made of plastic. But there are also here in this room very much bodies which are made of flesh, living flesh, and this brings us to I don't want to show the next bit of the text. This brings us to an important point, which is not a moment in the history of arts. Lorenzo Lotti shows the moment of incarnation. We are now into theology, Christian theology. What emotions are communicated in this image? I mean, this is not a typical incarnation, isn't it? Not a typical Annunciation scene. This is the scene of Annunciation. This is the angel communicating to Mary that she will give birth to man who will be God, and this is Mary. I mean, not like fiat, but rather a desperate attempt. Say no, right? I love the cat, by the way. Mind the cat. The cat knows what's going on. The cat says, yeah.
Yeah, I just see that the cat is able to notice an angel.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, because the cat belongs to the living world. I mean, that's perfect. I mean, the animate world here works perfectly, but it shows the moment of. It shows that Christian art is not made up of cliches, but it shows the deep emotional response of a woman who is taken by surprise totally by the news she doesn't understand, and the news that precisely tell her that the word, something abstract, will take on flesh in her body or in her flesh. I mean, this is something that she responds to. And Georg Steiner, who actually writes about this image in his Dramas of Creation, says, all Western thought has been doing that ever since the beginning of our era, has been doing that with regard to the incarnation. I mean, this is what we are, this is how we behave when we hear about word made flesh, about abstraction turned into our feeling body, that is flesh. Right? That's why I showed this. And the same George Steiner says that Western art completely changed way of thinking about human bodies, this time bodies as a thing that we can admire, perceive, watch, etc., etc., precisely from the early times of Christianity. I promised activities, and I am talking and talking all the time, so maybe there is a time for activity. Activity, watch intensely. Watch. Okay. Activity 2. Watch. Activity 3. You know what it is. So once again, watch. Watch this time as carefully as the first 2 times. Pay close attention to the face. I'm not going to say anything else. Now I want you to choose a pair here in this room, or if we are not even numbers, then it'll be a group of... Huh?
There are 16 of
So, perfectly. So we've got 8 pairs. It can be a person sitting next to you, it can be a person sitting opposite, it can be somebody you simply choose. I hope we'll manage to sort it out. And engage in a short conversation about those images relating to the 2 concepts, body and flesh. Because I told you what to do about the pictures after I showed them, I'll repeat the activities, the 3 activities, watch, watch, watch. Then you choose your pair and you engage in the 4th activity. That is, this time, talk. Okay? We're landing. Slowly landing. Okay. I thought it would be enough for you to walk in pairs about these 2 images. But when I went round eavesdropping on different pairs, I realized that totally different, brilliant ideas cropped in different conversations. So maybe, I'm not putting any pressure, but maybe there is something that you would like to share with others, or maybe, I'm sure, there are things that you'd like to hear from others. But hearing from others means that you also are willing to throw something into the basket. That is, you put into the basket, you take from the basket. All right, so who is really willing to hear something from others? Please throw something into the basket first.
I would like to hear something from others, so I just say we didn't have any ingenious ideas. So I'm throwing in something that is not that original, so I can hear something original. And it's only that the first 2 pictures depicted something that is without a humanity or a human feeling. It's just form. It's perfect form.
But we're just the beautiful masculine bodies. I mean, without humanity.
Big hands. And on the big picture, there's the human aspect in the emotion and the pain or ecstasy. Yeah. So that's in the basket. I want to hear something.
Before we pass on the basket to others, but you said pain or ecstasy, and that is, you didn't exclude ecstasy from this painting. isn't it something that strikes one when we look at the painting? Because, well, obviously we recognize the image of ecce homo and the passion of Christ, etc., etc. And the traditional way of looking at it would be simply pain. But, right, but there is a, thank you for that ecstatic bit in that. Yeah?
And also we talked about what seeing it makes with us, because when you see the two first picture, you see it in your head more. But when you see the last, you see it in your body. The thoughts get, and you research in your own body, trying to understand and this last.
In the feeling body. That is, the first two are admired. The third one is, the first two are conceptualized, and the third one is absorbed, one might even say. I mean, you're familiar with those images, beautiful images of the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian, where he's got arrows all around his beautiful body. But one gets the feeling that those arrows end precisely at the surface of his skin, that they are as if glued to the body, because his beauty remains intact. Because, I mean, that's why Saint Sebastian is usually represented as the ideal of masculine nude beauty in Christian art. While here, one doesn't get the feeling that those wounds are only skin deep. That, I mean, because with Saint Sebastian, one feels that the arrows go only precisely. This is skin deep wounds. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the basket goes round. There's always
when you came to eavesdrop on our conversation, we saw power as a kind of link between the three. The power of by perfect body, by attraction of perfect body, and then the power coming from experiencing pain and redeeming through pain, because there is the insignia of power, which is like, let's say, objective. Mm-hmm. This is the universal insignia. But then
that is universal. That is in Western culture. I mean, yes.
There is something. Going, you know, I'm the boss.
At least, yes. At least the rod that is in the. Mm-hmm, in the vertical dimension, there is something about powerful about
then I thought about mastery, because in the first two you have the mastery over physical body, but then you have the mastery of experience, especially pain. And I just thought, you know, I was exploring this thing that Jesus was a yogi. I mean, he practiced yoga and mindfulness.
This is, but in a sense, but this is a very mindful. I mean, this is a very mindful image, in a sense. All right.
I have some. I just came to a conclusion that the first two, they look like gods in power, and that's a paradox because the last one, who supposedly is a god, he looks like a mortal, and he's like gloomy.
He was mortal. After all, they killed him, and very successfully, right? That is for 3 days at least.
We have those first two who are like white.
So not very successfully in the end. Yeah. Yeah.
Those first two that I like white, and just in power, they're just perfect in some way, with open eyes, and they like see everything. And the last one is gloomy, dark, poor, mortal, and well, in pain. Many of you have already said. However, at the same time, I'm sorry for saying that. However, for me, he looks like a dead man or like a zombie, you know?
Like a very ill person.
Yeah, very, very ill
So much
person.
suffering,
Yeah.
and actually arousing our sympathy more than, you know, if we
Yeah.
don't attach this background.
Absorption, right?
Yes.
But there is something else that cropped out in your conversations, if I may give you credit, but at the same time bring back what, yeah? No, go ahead with that.
Which part of our conversation?
It's very rich. About entirety and partition or... Because remember that the first sculpture was actually slightly incomplete.
But the same as it came up in our conversation, also our conversation with you, we perfectly can complete those bodies as a certain form of mind image. Whereas the last body, which is in fact the only complete body, represented out of three, strike us with a sense of different supper, of different textures, of certain centralization, certain sort of blurred limits.
It is more in the color than in the shape. It is more in the invisible than in the precisely, and being more in the visible, it is in the invisible. It is more in the flesh than the bodies to be grasped. The color. I mean, the color. At the end of Gerard Manley Hopkins's The Windhover, you have this wonderful image of the bird catching prey, and there is the Windhover precisely, catching prey. And the back of the Windhover is reddish. And Gerard Manley Hopkins then has this line about gashing and gash gold vermilion. Gash gold vermilion. Both colors are here, and gold is, of course, power and divinity. Vermilion can be royalty here, but it is royalty but blood. Royalty and blood. Sorry, I was not in any pair, but picking on your conversation. But the basket is going round still.
Can we go back to gender issues for a moment?
I mean, why not?
Yeah, if we could go back to
Okay.
sculpture you showed us.
Yeah, okay.
These are sculptures of masculine beauty, but when we're looking at the hair, the figure, well, the hair is so beautiful, so nice, so feminine. From our perspective, I'm not saying I'm an expert in ancient culture and art. So maybe for the Greeks, it might have been something of masculinity as well.
So, in other words, if we had only this, if we had only that, we would have possibly a beautiful woman. If we have that, we have a very attractive male figure. Wait.
And now the hair of this.
And precisely, I want to think about that. And here, do we at all think about that? I mean, does it? You think about?
I was looking specifically at the hair part and the way in which these crown thorns basically melts with the hair, constituting. I'm at a loss for a word that I wanted to say here, but it's not exactly it. Because hair is part of the body. So here, by melting with the natural hair, it becomes the crown thorns. So thorns become embodied.
So that which is added to the body, that is the crown of thorns, becomes part of, I mean, that's you're suggesting that this fusion or the blurring that we've talked about is actually also abolishing the difference between subject and object here, that the thing external, crown of thorns, becomes, it goes so deeply as opposed to the arrows in Saint Sebastian, that, but this connects with pain, because one feels that the thorns stab really deep, that they as if grow out of the head, or rather go deeply into the head. Well, I don't know, but maybe, all right. The basket goes from?
I could offer a very different way of looking at the three representations. You might think that all three of them may be entitled ex homo, and yet the first two, it's cold, smooth marble, and the only interest, it seems, or what we think looking at it and trying to see the truth of it would be beauty and nothing else. But are we only beautiful? So this picture offers us a completely different insight into what is a human being. And a human being must be alive. And alive means suffering. But alive means also being. And that's the gold. That's the ecstasy. We have to be ecstatic and painful in order to feel that we are alive. So this representation of Christ is also a representation of us being full human beings and not just a beautiful sculpture. That's what I would offer.
And us being also divine, because historians of art point to the entire almond shape of the figure, and the almond shape of the figure in Byzantine art was very often a representation of divinity. So there is no doubt this figure is divine, not only for the color, but also for the shape. While at the same time, it is so thoroughly human, so thoroughly suffering, so thoroughly like us. By the way, many people here picked on the distinction between sculpture and painting. Again, Jean-Luc Marion has an interesting thing to say about it, saying that the painting is visibility realized in extreme, because it is, all the data is as if crushed to a flat surface. So it is the essence of visibility, as a matter of fact. When we look at a painting, we have the essence of visibility, unlike in the sculpture, which tells us that there is something that we have to that we don't see, that is left to be that we have to conceptualize, almost like the missing hands, right? In the first sculpture. And here we have, so this visibility here is engaged in the full pronouncement of flesh, pain, suffering, being human, right? All those things are at work here. Anyone else wants to throw something into the basket?
I was thinking exactly about this problem of medium, the medium that you're choosing. Of course, you can also, and we discussed that, that we can also see suffering in some sculptures. It's not ancient. But I was also thinking about if we about drama, like Oedipus, because it is very clear distinction between ancient sculpture and Christian painting. But what if we tried to look for this? Can we find the same expression of suffering in ancient art? And the first thing that came to my mind was not really the visual arts, but drama. It's also somehow visual. It's different medium. And would we have the same sense of, because I think the biggest problem with the first two is that we cannot, we are cut off from them because we cannot relate. They're too perfect for us to relate. But if it were Oedipus standing in front of us, would we connect? We talked a lot about connecting in this.
Perfect. You've pointed to you've just built a bridge between ancient representations of suffering and Christian representation of suffering. I will destroy this bridge, I think. I hope. With your help. They said that this image is not only about suffering, but also about sovereignty, power, divinity. I don't have a ready answer. I'll leave you with a question, all right? And I'll leave everybody with a question. Do we have the same attributes in Oedipus, King Oedipus, who's already blind, who knows what he's done? That is, the one who understands, but is blind, therefore cannot see, but sees. Do we have the same attributes in him at this particular moment? I don't want to suggest any answer. I want you to live with this question, think this question through when you go back to perhaps sometime to Oedipus. Yes. Maybe the question will somehow open the play in a new way. I don't know. So maybe I didn't destroy the bridge. Maybe there is still. Exactly. I mean.
I don't think we would accept tragedy of Oedipus if we did not assign to his suffering nobility.
All right.
We still see a noble human being, though not divine.
Okay, so there is this. I mean, there is this margin there. What is this? Precisely the dignity. What is the difference between dignity of a human, right, in ancient tragedy, and that Steiner calls it resplendence. I mean, it shines with power, light, and joy. Strange as it may sound, but this is a flame of fire. Isn't it? I mean, one sees, of course, the suffering with the marks of almost death mask, with those bruises on the face, blue marks under his eyes, which I can't remember whether we've already said that, but unlike all Byzantine icons which look at you, his eyes are closed. So that's why we said that he as if he thinks inside, or he feels inside, and this is perhaps also, this is what makes it easier for us to identify with that person which is feeling rather than confronting us with I can't look. Wake up. What's going on?
Yeah, he will find it.
Yeah? Okay. Yes, he has. All right. The philosophical part is over. Now, pleasure of plunging into drama. Macbeth again. What color was it?
Red for me.
Red, huh? Pale. Brownish gray. Gray. What? what did you say? Red. Mm-hmm. Roman Polański stands on this side. Jacek, I think, would agree. I mean, isn't it so? I mean, the sun rises red, sun sets red. I mean, throughout you've got those patches of red sky. I mean, even the sky is red. Fact. But who was it, the director of that with Michael Fassbender? Justin Kurzel would obviously stand on this side. I went this side, generally, this side rather, because I remember I went to see this film with a friend of mine who is was trained in classical philology, and he watched it, and we left the cinema hall, and he said, like in Homer, even blood was black in this film, which shows also how people think differently in terms of colors. Somebody said grey, and I would like you to brownish grey. Why did you say brownish grey? I mean, I think we all kind of know why red and why black. Why pale? Before we come to brownish red, why pale?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good, sir. Why do you look so
pale? And listen to that very carefully, because this is a bodily symptom of sensation. Our skin, our blood seems to evaporate, and we turn pale. We become like death masks, right? Pale is also the color of death. Pale is not only the color of fear, but the color of death, the apocalyptic color of death as well. And we all know that, after all, Macbeth is the play of apocalypse, right? It's the play of the last days. It's a very contemporary play. Brownish.
There is blood, it's red, but it's blood mingling with the earth of the marshes, of the heath. For me, it's like this coming together. The dirt, earth, which is gray, black, with with what happens in the battle, but not only in battle. It's because gray would be too cold, but there is this in brownish gray there is this hot or warm touch of human blood in it, which is still.
Do you realize that you're making it a perfect play of incarnation? That is the inanimate matter, that is the earth, being touched with or endowed with the quality of life. I mean,
but it's a very strange quality of life.
It is a very strange quality of life. Some people don't like this word because it seems to fuse two realities that, after all, do stand apart, but some people like me like this fusion. In Judeo-Christian tradition, we tend to think about human beings as beings of flesh and blood. On the one hand, it seems that, have you ever heard the statement that Macbeth is the most Greek of all Shakespeare's plays? And it seems to make sense in light of one of your workshops here, I think. I was not present here, but, you know, spies are everywhere. So I think there was a workshop which touched upon the presence of the three weird sisters, which are weird because of weird Anglo-Saxon, that is, you didn't speak about that, but weird sisters are there, the essence of And there is Hecate, of course. Yes, there is Hecate, of course. I mean, so some people say, of course, it is because of this predetermined kind of plot of Macbeth, the fact that everything is announced at the very beginning. Yes, things are decided, therefore, we're in the world of Oedipus king. To some extent.
It is the play that, I wouldn't say this is the most Greek play in Shakespeare, but rather the play which best opens to comparisons with Greek plays, which is a different thing.
Which is a different thing, and thank you for correcting me, because in the moment I was going to say, but of course, when we juxtapose the two realities, then we see also differences. And one of them is that the Greeks did not think in terms of incarnation. The Greeks did not think in terms of flesh and blood. I mean, this is Old Testament that goes into the New Testament. It is the Old Testament God that thinks of us in terms of our kidneys and in terms of, I mean, this is the language of both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Greeks, God forbid it. I mean, sarx, which is just flesh that is eaten by maggots, is not worth philosophical consideration. It is something that simply rots and disappears. And what is worth philosophical consideration are abstract notions, ideas, etc., etc., if we go into the Platonic thought. Now, Macbeth, I mean, the only thing that I gave you today was the title of this workshop. That is, Macbeth is a play about a figure of flesh and blood, especially a figure that can be represented as a figure of blood. Do you remember who is the most prominent figure appearing right at the very beginning of the play, where we hear the news about the battle? There's the bloody captain, and we know this is the bloody captain. He's the man who brings news from the battlefield, and as a soldier coming from the battlefield, he is, and here Claudia has the point, he is smeared with mud and blood. So Macbeth is a play of mud and blood, we could say. Right from the very beginning, we have this visual image of men of blood, right from the very beginning. Blood which is both here the principle of life, because it is, after all, it remains the principle of life, but also it suggests the murder, right? The person with bloody hands is the one who's taken away life of another person. Perhaps the best known quote from Macbeth is the one that you can now see on the screen. Can anyone locate it in the text and remind us where? I deliberately didn't give you any directions, so it is like, you know, the trick, the nasty trick of the teacher. Who says that? In which act? And to what end? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas in Cardenine, making the green one red. Who says that? And when? Come on. Okay, smart. Okay. I just wanted somebody else to say it so that...
That's uttered by Macbeth, Act 2, Scene 2. He killed Duncan. And he looks at his hands. And his wife says, well, it's an easy thing, you just go and wash. A little drop of water will clean your hands.
Which, by the way, when she says that, do you realize that she's making a mockery of one of Christian rituals? A drop of blood, of water, a drop of water will clean you of this guilt. I mean, sprinkling with water will do away with your sin. But, and then you're innocent. But of course, this is a mockery of the ritual.
She pays for that mockery.
She pays for that mockery.
As a curse, she
Mhm.
puts on herself.
Exactly. She says, give me a drop of blood, a drop of water, and blood will go. And he then
he sees the situation completely different. He looks at his hands and he knows that there is no water in the whole world that will do away with the blood. The process will be the opposite. The blood will go into the water. Water will be turned into a bloody thing, into a living flesh.
You realize that the trick is here in
the word incarnate.
In the underlined word. We've started with colors, we continue with colors. Incarnadine is a color in English. But now we'll have problems defining it. Some people say it's pinkish red. Some people say it is reddish pink. I mean, it has this quality. It is in between pink and red. So Claudia going for broken colors in Macbeth not only had the advantage of mixing blood with mud, but also picking on that color. It is not only red that dominates the entire play, but it's precisely this pinkish touch, which is the color of what? Of cat flesh, but also, come on, I mean,
Ruddy cheeks.
I mean, if we look at our skin, I mean, not if somebody is tanned, but when one thinks about the color of human flesh, skin, it is kind of pinkish because of the blood that gives it this taint. It is, of course, I mean, I immediately point to the etymology of the word incarnadine, which goes back to the Latin caro, flesh. And just one more picture here that will make our life more joyful here in this workshop. This is one of the images of, this time not the Annunciation, but already the Madonna with the child. And I want you to, first of all, to admire the baby, which is certainly of the color incarnadine, isn't it? As opposed to all the colors of the Passion that we watched before. It is so nicely fleshly pink. But when one looks more carefully, the boy has something in his hand. Now, art historians, this is an anonymous Polish painter from second half of the 15th century, now on display in a museum in the south of Poland, Tarnów. Just because I saw it 2 weeks ago, I picked this one because I loved it. Art historians draw our attention to the unusual way in which the child holds that flower. Do you notice anything about it? It's okay. When we see all of it, what strikes you about the way the boy, Christ, little Jesus rather, holds this flower? Upside down. Normally you present the flower, right? Upside down. Why? The question is always why. Something else? Maybe?
I'm thinking of umbilical cord.
That's a possibility, but something else.
Is it heavy?
I don't think so.
It's not offering
No, not really offering it, but this is her breast and her heart. And almost like stabbing the heart. I mean, they say that the painter wanted to, as if, signal the pain that she will feel at the moment of, that is, it is a very joyful picture, but it foreshadows the pain of the passion because of the flower, which is not just for its beautiful petals, but also for the stem, which points at her heart and which is sharp, which has a sharp end, which is almost like a little sword. I mean, it is flower, but at the same time, it is, I don't know, kind of a spiky thing that stabs her heart. But another thing is that we may think it is, I mean, the nice thing is about the species of that flower, because she is called Madonna with a carnation. And the beautiful thing is in the name of the flower, which is not the rose, but carnation, which, according to false etymology, was called so because it was usually pink, pinkish red, therefore connected with caro. I mean, this is not a real etymology of the English carnation, but in very many languages, carnations are associated with the body and with the incarnation.
They're called pinkish.
They are called pinkish too. They are called pinkish, exactly. So we have here an image of something, I mean, you can, carnation might be called for its pinkiness and derived from French carnation, person's color or complexion, which probably is from Italian dialectical carnagione, flesh color, from late Latin carnatione, nominative carnation, carnatio, fleshliness. From caro, flesh, originally a piece of flesh. So the carnation here brings us back to the notion of our being incarnate beings, and Macbeth, at its heart, I wanted to say, has this moment of incarnate experience, very strong moment of our being flesh and blood. Now, I want you now to have a look at these excerpts. I'll give you a couple of minutes to read through the handout. I suggest that I read out now those two passages. The first one is just one character speaking, and the second is a dialogue between Duncan and Ross. Both are news from the battlefield. I want you now, as you've read those two passages for a while, you've been reading them for a while, and now as you listen to me, I would like you to focus on different character of these two accounts, how they, what is the difference between the first account and the second account, not in that it is a snapshot from another part of the battlefield, because it is, but also in the nature of the report, in the focus on the report, in the, one might say, in the way in which the speaker conceptualizes or thinks about the battle, but also thinks about soldiers in the battle, right? Because, picks up different elements that are important to him in the battle. Okay, so the first excerpt reads as follows. If there is anything that we should explain, just say it, all right? After I finish the first one and then the second. The first one reads, doubtful it stood, that is the result of the battle. Doubtful it stood, as two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their art. The merciless MacDonald, worthy to be a rebel, For to that the multiplying villains of nature do swarm upon him. From the western isles of kerns and gallows glasses is supplied, and fortune, on his damned quarrel smiling, showed like a rebel's whore, but all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name, disdaining fortune, with his brandished steel, which smoked with bloody execution, like valor's minion, carved out his passage till he faced the slave, which never shook hands, nor bade farewell to him, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chaps, and fixed his head upon our battlements. The first account. The kerns and gallows glasses are names for Celtic soldiers, for different types of troops sent into the battlefield. That's the first one. Any other things that I should perhaps explain in that?
Unseen from nave to chaps.
Unseen from nave to chaps, I mean, this is a very vivid image of somebody thrusting his sword in the body of the other person and just cutting him, ripping him off. It's Macbeth the Reaper, not Jack the Reaper, but it's Macbeth the Reaper right from the very beginning, right? And that's almost like we enter the play accompanied by a image of something that we could call vivisection, right? It is, the human body is opened up and we look inside with curiosity, and the play ends with another image of Macbeth being, after all, subdued by a man who was born not in a natural manner, but a Caesarean, so untimely ripped, so as if torn from his mother's womb. And once again, we have this, the image of human body. Here we have a soldier who is sliced almost into two pieces, and then the open womb of a mother, also bleeding, right? By the way, birth and death, clasping hands in the play, in this wonderful composition of the entire image. But this idea of opening human body and letting out blood, but also examining it, almost making an inspection of what is inside. It's like the curiosity about, all right, you tell me that a human being is capable of this and that and that. Tell me what's there inside that generates, what is Macbeth made of? He is not cut into pieces, his head is only cut off, but the cutting off of other bodies allows us as if to ask this question. What we're examining human interior in order to find there, not in any abstract notion, but precisely in the flesh, the origin of all ambitions, of the drives that push Macbeth. I mean, it's not those witches, which are not witches. It's written there, it's written in the body. And we read the body right from the beginning, but not read it in an abstract way. We read it, we examine it very literally. So that's the first excerpt. And then we have, as I said, a snapshot from another part of the battlefield, when Duncan asks Ross, whence comest thou, worthy Thane? To which he receives the following answer. From 5, great king, when the Norwegian banners flout the sky and fan our people cold. Norway himself, with terrible numbers, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor, began a dismal conflict, till that Bellona's bridegroom, lapped in proof, confronted him with self-comparisons, point against point rebellious, arm against arm, curbing his lavish spirit. And to conclude, the victory fell on us. A different account, different part of the battlefield. Anything that I should add a footnote to? No. Clapped, lapped in proof. This is, it is as if he's armored in the evidence of his valor, right? His armor is not made of steel, but of his valiance. He's lapped in proof, therefore, he has all the qualities, the sword and the shield of his integrity. Now, remember that I asked you to compare these two, and this time, again, I would like you to work in pairs, but sorry, not the same pairs. So that's the only restriction imposed on you. You have to choose another person to work with, and with another person, you try to discuss the difference between precisely the language of the first account and the language of the second account, the perspective of the first account and the perspective of the second. Okay, not what is described, but the filter through which the person speaking sees the world around him, and try, perhaps it will be possible, try to connect it to the previous discussion concerning flesh, blood, abstraction, sensible reality. Okay? Are we still to?
Yeah, I'm joining so 16.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Change your pairs, please. I mean, 3 hours of sitting is unbearable, so. We'll be landing. Okay, another, that is, prepare, fasten your seatbelt. Fasten your seatbelt. Huh? Ladies and gentlemen, we are not approaching landing. We are already very much landing. So I had to interrupt vivid discussions. But, go ahead. Welcome to Gdańsk airport. The temperature outside is cold. Yes, it's low. Okay. Lower than usual, lower than expected. And we are now into these two. Will you agree with me that, I mean, as I was reading Macbeth, I thought it was like an eye-opener. I felt there must be a reason why Shakespeare confronted us with two so completely different ways of talking about the battle and battlefield. Because it's like, of course, we know that he was a master of talking about same things in the manner of aristocrats and in the manner of the plebeians. He was a master of impersonating different perspectives, but here something different than, let's say, class difference is at stake. Something that perhaps is closer to our concern with body and flesh, rather than a person who is using sophisticated language and somebody who is, although this is also a touch of the fact that Ross is obviously educated. He speaks the language of somebody who uses sophisticated language, comparisons, a touch of ancient mythology included in his account. But it is almost like I have a friend who is an English poet writing sometimes in English, sometimes in French, and he's very sensitive to the fact that the English language so nicely combines Romanesque abstract diction with the fleshly character of the Germanic base on which these abstract notions grow. And here we have also a touch of it, I think. So we're back into duality after the speaking about incarnation, but maybe not such a sharp duality as we might think. All right. What did you notice when you spoke about these two fragments?
Okay, I had to share my experience as a 5-year-old boy with my family in a village. I experienced the slaughter of a pig, and I was there with my all senses, you know, smelling the blood, the intestines, and then saw making of the, well, you know, in Scottish, but we plug pudding. In Polish, it's kaszanka. So the essence for me is how to make kaszanka.
But for both?
You can't get more graphic, I think.
No, you can't get, exactly, you can't get more graphic. And thank you for showing us that we actually smell the first bit. There is a word which makes you smell the first bit. Smoked with bloody execution.
May I share something? Because
Sorry. We're before lunch.
No kaszanka for lunch.
I also have similar experience, but I realized that the students don't. I remember once, because I was trying to convince the students that you can smell blood in that way. One of them was, how does blood smell? Do you know? How do you know how blood smells? I was speechless. I didn't really know what to say. But now I realize it was a completely different experience.
May I share my experience with you? May I share my experience with you? I was once discussing not Shakespeare, but metaphysical poetry with my students, and there was a passage relating to larks singing in spring, and I said, of course, you can imagine a lark when you walk in the fields and when you hear the lark singing in the air. And one of them said very politely, you know, people of our generation do not walk in the fields. Which is a fact. I mean, which is a fact. We have, when we teach such excerpts, we have to introduce our students to the world of sensations, to the world of the smell of blood, the smell of plowed field, because the earth smells, the smell of the wood, the feeling of wet grass. I mean, these things are abstract to them, and I was very grateful for informing me, for the students telling me that this is not their world. It's like another friend of mine was an Englishman teaching in Saudi Arabia, and he was given the task of teaching Daffodils by William Wordsworth to them. And of course, you always start talking about daffodils with explaining to the students that daffodils grow wild in the English landscape, and this is something that every Englishman understands as everyday experience. And he started his lecture, And he said he couldn't see his female audience, but he could see men, and he said he saw their eyes. He said, it's like you look out of the window and you of course see those meadows with golden daffodils. And then he realized that this was out of context. But we are very often out of context with our students. Sharing exactly the same, let's say, geographical, we think historical background. No, we are constantly reminded of the difference. I don't want to talk about generation gap, but we're constantly reminded of the fact that teaching is a matter of the dialogue with people who have a different world around them. And
it's about tapping into experiences.
It's about tapping into, precisely, absolutely, yeah. Yes, yes, exactly.
To every experience,
but another thing is that when you tell them about, this is what Claudia said, when you tell them about that, it is not enough because they haven't experienced it. And the first bit is about, and it speaks to people, I mean, in Shakespeare's time, it spoke to people who had the smell of blood in their nostrils and the smell of rotting bodies on the London Bridge of people executed for different kind of crimes in their nostrils. I mean, they could smell death. What is it? Right? And of course, you can tell them and describe it, and this will remain a paper piece for them because they haven't smelled it. Another example, one of the most brilliant theatre productions of Macbeth I've ever seen was made by a Lithuanian director, Nekrošius, who, when he presented the Ghost of Banquo appearing on stage, he illustrated it with the noise of swarming flies. And of course, this made any person who realizes what's going on smell the presence of rotting body. I think I would have to explain it to my students as well. What it is, what is behind this kind of theatrical impulse, which is, after all, purely, we could say this is pure experience, not for everybody. Our experiences do not overlap. So, I think we've already grasped much of that first passage, which is kaszanka, which smells blood, which is opening the body, which is mud. What else? What else there? I mean, anything else? I mean, this was so graphic that hardly anything can be added to it. But maybe. Anyone wants to? Yep.
I was explaining with Katarka, so could you please?
Okay. If somebody is not a vegetarian, it is quite tasty, but...
Well, we also have such versions.
Yeah, there is a beautiful vegetarian version.
Oh, you see, without blood, I hope. So, that's the first... I mean, sometimes when we talk about battle, when we talk about the way generals treat soldiers in the battlefield, we say mincemeat. And that's that. It's mincemeat, right? And it also shows the attitude to war. It is who says these things?
Captain.
The bloody captain.
And Ross, who is a very tricky.
Who is a very slimy character, as a matter of fact, seems to be standing at a distance.
Well, he did not probably participate.
There is no smell of blood.
No, looks like a gentlemanly fight, point against point, rebellious, arm against arm. There is no, it's elegant, honorable, there is no blood anywhere around.
There is very much of the tournament type of this, like
Chivalry almost.
Chivalry, yes, game, tournament.
Yeah, noble activities.
But what you are foregrounding, and absolutely correctly, is the class difference. Okay? The bloody captain speaks from the experience of somebody who had to cut his way through other people in order to get to victory, while Ross is not. While Ross is speaking from a privileged position, we might say. But this also somehow relates to the idea of bodies and flesh, I think. If you think about it, how? I could see people nodding heads, which means...
Again, it's the experience, because, you know, the class thing would be here that, you know, the soldiers from the dirty work, you know, they had this kaszanka experience, and the other part of the society, they have the verbal experience.
That's it.
Plus visual, maybe. I mean,
verbal, visual, abstract notions.
There is this terrible numbers. People are terrible numbers. They're not bodies.
There is no flesh there. It is absolutely, it is the account which is rendered in totally abstract terms. We could say that Ross is a Greek speaker, the one who thinks in terms of abstract notions. He gives the account of noetic. This is a thoroughly noetic account. And the other one is the infleshed account. Notice that the latter is easier to talk about, and in reporting your conversation concerning the first one, you actually went back to the real life experience, and you substituted analysis with an analogy, which was an analogy rooted in the material world.
It's the highest praise we could think of.
Absolutely, but that's but that.
Especially the numbers, extremely sinister as well, because it's like almost prediction of Holocaust.
Yeah, I mean, well, people are numbers. Where people turn into numbers, and and this latter, I mean, when we talked, the three of us, when we talked about the brandished steel, notice that Ross doesn't even think about sword in terms of an object, even, but of the material of which it is made. I mean, here he works through metonymy, which is substitution, right? So he gives us an account which is filtered through precisely certain conceptual, well, that's why I said he thinks like a Greek philosopher almost. Not simply only like a poet.
I would be very careful because both actually use synecdoche.
Okay.
Metonymy.
But
point against point, and still it's actually...
That's true.
There is a difference, but the figure is very similar.
Okay, agreed. Yes, but why the captain uses it, replacing material object with other material, like they did. Battlefield is mincemeat or kaszanka. Here we have a translation from the material to the abstract.
I would say it differently. It's more like, because when you think of point, it's very little touching in the second part. It is a second passage. While the first passage, there is more like contact, also in metaphors. It uses metaphors, it uses images. I think this is the same. This is the same poetry. But in the second passage, there is less touching, while in the first one, this metaphor of swimming. I can't stop that image of Wilfred Owen's gas swimming, the First World War poem when he compares dying in gas attack to drowning.
Well, because chlorine causes exactly the same. Because the kind of death is exactly the same, because you actually are cut off from air. You choke with gas.
And the speaker in Owen's poem says, "Okay, I saw him drowning," and the image is horrible. And it's very similar here. Swimmers who gasp for air, drowning, and the soldiers are like in the sea. The battle, you said it's mincemeat, but it's also the sea where you are almost like it's very difficult to keep your head above the water. And that's all.
I wanted to say bingo, because when you return to Macbeth, saying there is not enough water in the seas of the world, it perfectly shows the coherence of Shakespeare's imagination. I mean, whatever we say, he was a good playwright. This coherence of poetic images, which then return us to the question which Marta posed, and I deliberately, remember we started with selective hearing. I pretended not to hear. I didn't hear the question she posed when she said what it means that the sea is made incarnadine. You asked this question, yes? And then there was absolutely no reaction on my part. I felt, okay, let the question hang in the air until we reach for it. And we ask this question about how Shakespeare makes this connection between animate and inanimate nature in Macbeth at this point. What does it mean that the sea gets the color of human flesh? What does it mean? What does it mean that soldiers are like waves of the sea, right from the beginning? How the two worlds, that of the human flesh and that of nature around us, inanimate nature, how do they come together? What does it mean that the sea is not turned red, but incarnadine with caro, right in the middle of that word? How do you think? What is going on here? What is he trying to, what kind of, how do you respond now to this metaphor, incarnadine waters, after we've seen Bloody Captain's account of the battlefield? Mutilated bodies in water, the image of total carnage. I mean, that brings to mind this idea. I mean, notice that we're talking about a Renaissance play, but there is absolutely no way in which we can read texts without the awareness of our experience and our knowledge of the world, which somebody here said almost like Holocaust, right? And the fact that we are here introduced right from the beginning into the idea of the totality of war. It is not one army against the other. It is the very first World War, but it is a total conflict where the whole world, the whole universe, I said it is an apocalyptic play. It becomes apocalyptic when we realize that the whole world is at strife. But also, notice that when the sea is turned pink, when it gets the color of human flesh, well, what we started with is the difference between body and flesh. Body can be touched, but it doesn't feel. The sea that has turned pink is like human flesh, is mingled with blood, begins to feel the pain that people bring into this world. It is no longer our pain. It's the universe hurts because of what Macbeth does. And, I remember Professor Jerzy Limon saying, notice that there is not a single mention of a priest or a bishop or any kind of, let's say, church authority in the play, which would suggest that Macbeth's actions are censored on account of being immoral in this human ethics, human or religious decrees, commandments. But it is nature. We've spoken about animals, right? It is nature which reacts with but it has almost visceral reaction to Macbeth's actions, because nature becomes once again animate and fleshed. There is a strange kind of affinity which culminates wonderfully with the moment of the walking wood. We have walking wood. We have.
And in a way, that very much changes the status of the witches.
Of course.
Who are not really any supernatural. They come from that. I think during your workshop, Jacek, we were thinking about where they belong to. Do they belong to people with themselves? They are also. They are somehow. They belong to the natural world.
And that explains also why they are presided over by Hecate, that is, the Greeks think of the world in terms of deities of woods, springs,
violence, prostitutions with people, and giving justice, supporting the weakest.
So it suggests that this moral code in Macbeth is somehow. This is what is the perfect example of natural law, right? Thou shalt not kill. It is not a commandment that is of any that is in any way invented, but it is to be found in nature, and it is found in the nature that Macbeth discovers. Because the moment he kills sleep, which means he kills the natural succession of night and day, right? Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking shows that this world has been injured in such a way that it no longer keeps its order. I mean, this is why it is the moment when we go back to the times before the creation of night and day, before the world was created or after it disappears. That is a perfect embodiment of the idea of the apocalypse. All right. It is very often said that Macbeth is a play about the murderer's conscience. And the last bit that we're going to touch upon is, it should be the third excerpt and the fourth. When third and fourth. Sorry, number 3 is on the first page and the excerpt is on the other side of the page. But Macbeth, when he thinks about the witches, weird sisters telling him, predicting the future, he thinks that this prophecy, as he says, cannot be ill, cannot be good. And then he goes on in the following manner. If ill, why hath it given me earnest of success commencing in the truth? I am fain of cawdor, if good. Why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not. Nothing is but what is not is perhaps the most pregnant line, 2 lines in Macbeth, because it precisely points to the end of the world. Nothing is but what is not, says Macbeth himself. But knowing that it will happen, how does he speak about his fear? Something very simple now. How does Macbeth say that he is afraid?
His heart almost breaks his ribs.
But yes.
To go out.
Yes, and remember how we focused on those images of the body opened up, and here it bursts as if from within. The sphere is something that will, in a minute, show to us his inner thoughts. But we do not go, very often with students we say, we as if with asides, with soliloquies, we enter the character's mind. Not so with Macbeth. We enter his chest. Although it is verbalized, I mean, this is what I am trying to show right from the beginning, this connection between the character and him being an enfleshed creature. Tell me, the very last thing, why was Shakespeare so focused, so obsessed with the idea of flesh? How do you think? A very open question.
Because all experiences are finally based, physically. And I don't know, I mean, I cannot be objective here, but this is how I use Shakespeare. That's
yes.
Everything can be somehow grasped if you start with breathing or your heartbeat, or what happens when you have to do something physically.
It's what you say resonates with the cognitive idea of how we conceptualize the world. We conceptualize the world through our body and how we feel it in our body, how our body makes it possible for us to look at and see in the sense of understanding.
In the sense of understanding.
Physically, our experience of the world starts with our first breath as a baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a pain
so you cannot experience the world,
brain.
you cannot experience our bodies if you do not first feel something in your flesh.
I'll stand in. Okay, Claudia.
And when you said that the Greeks, they think in abstract notions, but that it is impossible when you look at the language and how it works. It is impossible to speak or think in abstract notions because all abstract notions, they derive from a physical experience or a word that would refer to something physical, and then it becomes some kind of abstraction and is raised. Maybe raised is not a very good word, but it's disembodied from becoming abstract. So,
it's a physical word. It shows how we conceptualize abstract things in physical terms.
One of the books is the word metaphor is itself a metaphor because it means it's carrying over. Carrying over is a physical activity, which started to mean figurative, abstract notions. But it's a metaphor is also a metaphor because it is also physical. That's
Splendid. You all agreed And now I want to disagree. I want to stand against all of you because I want to say it to Ross. Go back to Ross and he takes it for granted that the only way of talking about reality is in abstract terms. Huh? So, why there is more bloody captain in Shakespeare than Ross? That's the question. Why he follows the path of the bloody captain rather than Ross, whereas many theatre players would choose the. You have plenty of texts which follow the path of Ross.
No, I was just trying to joke about the economy of the theatre. So it's better to talk to the people about the experience, about their bodies, to win the publicity.
But come on, you're touching on something very essential when we compare Shakespeare's plays to the plays of the so-called university wits. When you compare the text of William Shakespeare to that of his university-trained contemporaries and trained in ancient theatre, they would follow the path of Ross because they wouldn't be so much concerned if they wrote for university theatres, for university students. They wouldn't think about profit in theatre, and they wouldn't go the way you suggested. So, I mean, this was not just a joke. It was a very well-grounded intuition in finding an answer to the question that we pose. Why Shakespeare follows this path of enfleshment, of flesh, of bodily experience? Yes, because we notice that the audience will more readily respond to, or will be more sympathizing with characters who...
If I may interrupt, I'm thinking about physical experience at Globe, where, you know, I could only afford a ticket for, let's say, £10, and I had to physically stand, you know, for 3 or 4 hours, and then be with the mob, you know, that Shakespeare fought. But it's that, you know, that mob had to be somehow kept there with their experiences and things. But again, everything is about dialogue. Everything is about connecting both experiences and the art. And I think, you know, Shakespeare somehow, well, he has done a lot for promotion of the art as the you know, battlefield, rather than you know, the bloody real experiences.
So the answer goes back to to repeating the obvious, that Shakespeare was not simply a playwright, but rather a man of theatre. And it is being a man of theatre and understanding that these texts are written for actors who have bodies and who are of flesh and blood.
And audiences that have bodies.
And audiences that ache after leaving the performance, which is shorter than 3 hours workshop, feel it in their bodies, right? So he responds to that, and notice that what we did today is, I started with an overview of philosophical approaches to the difference between body and flesh, and of course Shakespeare wouldn't have the slightest idea of, well, I don't know if he would relate in any way to ancient philosophy, but he wouldn't have the slightest idea of the path we followed from Galileo Galilei through Descartes to Husserl, not to mention Michel Henry. The reason why we ultimately need, I think, this contemporary philosophy is to discover something very basic, That is, discover the truth about Shakespeare being man of theatre. But without this philosophy, it would be just a cliche. All right, Shakespeare was a man of theatre, and what does it mean? Now, given this philosophical background, we understand that he managed to grasp something that is essential also for us, and it is essential for us. I made a joke at the very beginning, which was not meant only as a comic interlude, but which was significantly placed there. I referred to the experience of COVID era. That is, the experience of not being able to relate to other people in person. We may not touch each other constantly, but being together in one room, breathing in the same air, relating to other people who are present in body and not via video connection, is so different. And this is also the experience of theatre, because, and that's the difference between, Jacek has moved from here to this is the difference between film and theatre, right? Where the actor is now present and responding to the breathing, living presence of the audience, which may be sitting uncomfortably in their chairs and thinking, when is it going to end? Or being enthralled by the performance. Right? Or cry, or rejoicing because of they've seen something, laughing, whatever, responding. I once had a conversation with a person who has some experience in theatre and is also an academic. I said, can you tell me why are we so exhausted after this year of teaching in the manner we teach? And I got different responses from different people. This man said, because you don't have bodily presence of people and you don't have the audience present at your performance.
You are not together with anybody.
Yes.
You are the other.
You are the other. So this happy gathering of others now concludes a reflection on Shakespeare being a man of theatre. I'll leave you with reflections. If there is anything you want to throw in, once again, to the basket, I think we'll make a round at the end. The basket will go from hand to hand, and everybody throws in a drop to wind up this workshop of, not on Macbeth, but on flesh and body in theatre. Because you realize now that Macbeth was only a pretext to talk about something completely different, to talk about the trauma of COVID teaching throughout a year. So that is obvious now. Who wants to start?
Yeah. Because I keep on returning to the festival. All the productions that I saw were very memorable. But when we talk about body, when we talk about flesh, the last production that I saw still keeps nagging me, so to say. It was literally bloody, in that, particularly in a scene from Macbeth, everybody was covered in blood. Of course, we knew that it wasn't real blood, that it was a theatrical convention. But I was wondering what it was that they were using. And I didn't realize it until I smelled it. Like everybody else in the audience, in the auditorium. It was Worcestershire. Also about the color, what we said before.
That it is brown, as a matter of fact.
Brownish, reddish, something like that. And that was the color that I chose when you first.
We are back into menus. Okay. Which, by the way, it's not just the smell; it's the taste. But yes, that's it.
Yes, we was talking about how you needed experience to understand the text. But I agree on that in one way. But art could also give us an experience that you can understand something that you haven't done in your real life. And that's something of the most important things with art. So it goes, I think, it goes both ways. And maybe when we talk about experience, also imagination is also a very important aspect, because I can use, even though I haven't smelled, I was thinking about, I don't smell blood sometimes. Yes, I maybe have it. I have this strong experience, but I have different experience that I can use to imagine how it is to smell, and then I can understand it. And yes, so of course experience is important, but and different experience, but you can use art and text, like good text and good art, to understand something that I probably never will experience in my life. Or for example, I hope I never will experience, but I can really, I think, understand and use my imagination. To understand.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Encourage to understand and also encourage to experience. It was not experience until I started to read it in literature.
Well, this is that's what Claudia, as a matter of fact, pointed to when she spoke about metaphor. That we are thinking, that is, we are given an analogy, you said, about other experiences we can use. So we can translate what we already know into something that we relate to when we're reading a play, and then we find something in our experience that relates to it and gives us an insight. This is how we learn. Yes, we use the familiar in order to find out. Yes. And the trick is to open that door in the students to the familiar. Right?
Use what is familiar to them to incorporate the unfamiliar.
Thank you for using the word incorporate. Because this is what we are talking about. No, this is it. This is about, yes, this is about incorporating.
Yes.
You wanted to say.
Yes, I was. When we have such texts which are so sensuous, yes, and appealing to our senses in a way, I don't think that they are, if you are in the theater, you have to use more and more ways of be real in the sensing. You have to use your imagination and the symbolic way of doing it, because I think you can make people experience the most horrible things which are there without having a real smell from the scene. But we are doing other things to make my body freeze.
Yes, you get this.
Yeah. I hope you understand. But we don't need the real thing. The props and the sauce and
we don't need the real. Actually, we don't need the real blood because the sauce.
We can't kill on the stage.
We don't kill on the stage, but marvelously, this day for me started with a wonderful breakfast with Mateusz, and we spoke about theatrical conventions, and we spoke about the fact that whenever showing things in real is overdone on stage, it kills theatre. Yeah. I mean, that's how we started this day, and this is absolutely true, because we are back to those words, which are just words on page, but they were crafted in such a way, they were put together in such a way as to relate precisely to our flesh. And when I talk about incarnation, for me, it means the connection between word and flesh. It is not just flesh or just word, but it is one into another. So that's perfectly agreed, yes. Mm-hmm.
Could I add something?
Yes.
Yes, because I like this way of going into the text, and I like very, very much that you are making us and your students, I presume, aware of the way of seeing, using your ears, using your tactile senses, and using your eyes, of course, and all your senses, because they all have essential memories. And I think it's very, very important to show the students and let them experience their own sensuous memories, because they all have, but you have to train it.
Activate it, actually.
Yes,
and as like condition.
Yeah, through activation.
Yes.
Yes. So I think it's very important the way of looking into the flesh and body here. So, yes.
Anyone wants to throw in a little stone into the basket, stone of memory?
Just a gloss on what we have been doing today. I was thinking of all those Macbeths I've seen and how very often the whole description of the bloody battle is cut completely. It disappears, it doesn't exist. Małgorzata here drew our attention to the fact that if we follow the text carefully, we can see the connections of all the metaphors, how they build our understanding of what is the experience of the play for us. So in the theatre, unfortunately, we have to go through the filter of the director and the actors who decide what they want to show and what they don't want to show. Which reminds me of the very beginning of our meeting today, when Małgorzata was trying to tell us that we see through the lattice of our eyes and through the labyrinths of our ears, which in turn brought back in my memory the unforgettable Jerzy Limon, the founder of the theatre, who kept saying after King Lear, look with your ears, which means listen to the language. And just a small remark, if you look once again at the description of the bloody captain, what the battle was like, it's almost like offering us a camera. You just look at what he says and you see through you zoom in on this. We are invited to look with our ears. That is with eyes also, because we read with eyes. But the people in Shakespeare's times did not so much read as they listened. And that's why this description is so important, and that's why we do not understand why it's
listened and memorized. Also the exercise of memory, which is absolutely forgotten now. Because imagination is linked also to memory.
So there have been good times when I used to teach Shakespeare, which I don't anymore. I always spent at least one meeting on this passage, because it's an eye-opener what you can find in Shakespeare and what you can miss in Shakespeare if you do not know the play and you go to the theatre without really giving attention to it. So I would very much encourage you to read Shakespeare, not only to read Shakespeare.
How often? I'm sorry.
I have a short anecdote. One of my students said once that you have really been always careful about thinking that when you choose to see at something, there's something you are not seeing. And what is it? Because you have this, sorry.
May I have a suggestion? There will be a round-up session after lunch. And I make a promise to the organizers that we finish 10 minutes before 1. So 10 to 1. So if we could stop now and either continue this conversation over lunch or return to it in the session so that I keep my promise. Słowo harcerza. Okay. It's to Shakespeare. It's to Shakespeare.